So I come to fly a particular flag tonight and talk about disabled children. I didn't want that group of children to be forgotten in this special week in Scotland where we're talking about adoption of children. I also come with two hats, so as well as being, so I'm not a medical doctor, I'm an academic researcher, which is where the doctor comes in. I'm also an adoptive parent though, so I adopted two boys when they were 1 and 3, about 13, 14 years ago, so they're now scary teenagers. So I've got one of those, two of those too. I'm part of a group at Strathclyde University. It's a working group that's called Achieving Permanence for Disabled Children. And we exist because we realised that disabled children don't necessarily have the same access to the opportunity to find an adoptive family that non-disabled children have. So we're a group of people from 3 different universities in Scotland and various voluntary agencies who come together and talk about and promote the idea of disabled children having just as much right to a new family as quickly as possible as non-disabled children. The other person who can't be here tonight is Dr. Vicky Welsh, who's a colleague of mine at Strathclyde, so she apologises for not making it. So why do I feel the need to talk about disabled children specifically? Well, around 7% of children in the UK are disabled children, but if we look at the statistics of children in the looked after system who have disabilities, about double the number of children, around 13, 14%, although we're probably not very good at counting this sort of thing, are disabled children within the looked after system. If we then look at the numbers of children who then come through and have the opportunity of an adoptive family, then those numbers don't translate. So there's still a perception around about disabled children being unadoptable, has been the phrase that's been used in the past. So if we look at the research, we know that disabled children wait longer than non-disabled children to be adopted. We know that they tend to be, when they are adopted, they tend to be adopted at a slightly older age than non-disabled children. And we also know that they tend to be placed out with their local authority area. And we've talked tonight about things like contact with maybe birth parents or siblings. And obviously the further away you are placed from the local authority that's dealt with your family, the more difficulties and practical difficulties that creates in terms of contact. So disabled children are disadvantaged within the system at the moment. But also if we look at the research evidence, it clearly shows that adoption is just as successful for disabled children as it is for non-disabled children. Again, because I'm a researcher, I'm going to tell you what the research says, but there's a good body of research there that tells us about what some of the motivations might be for adopters who are considering adopting a disabled child. And often it boils down to personal experience. So it might be that you grew up with a disabled sibling. It might be that your job involves working with disabled children, and often that can influence people to be open to the idea of adopting a disabled child. Sometimes it's also about your own personal values or political values, so you might feel a sense of social responsibility and feel that you can meet the needs of a disabled child. So if any of those things feel like they are about you, then that's the sort of thing that you could potentially explore when you were in the preparation and assessment stage of applying to be an adopter. The other thing that research tells us very clearly is that experience in terms of caring for, being around disabled children is great, but actually it's not essential. If you don't have any, it doesn't mean that you'll be a bad parent of a disabled child. So these are skills that can be developed over time if that's a route that you want to go down. In terms of the skills that tend to be good skills for adopters to develop where they're caring for disabled children, then it tends to be things like being good at networking and drawing in resources when you need them, having good coping skills, which is always a good thing to have if you're an adopter. Also, though, having good advocacy skills, so being able to speak up and be on behalf of your child and to demand some of the things that they need. And again, I think there are lots of people who come to adoption, maybe through quite difficult routes themselves, who have these sorts of skills as a result of that. There's also a lot of research that tells us how satisfying being a parent of a disabled child and being an adoptive parent of a disabled child can be. So we've got lots of accounts from adopters of disabled children who talk about just the relationship they have with their child and how special that is, how receiving affection from their child is really rewarding for them. Seeing children develop, even making very, very tiny steps, can feel very rewarding for adoptive parents. So I would encourage you to think, could I possibly be mum or dad to a disabled child, or do I know someone who might make a good adoptive parent of a disabled child?